I
Hello.
wasn't planning on going over to her place that afternoon. It was supposed to be simple. Knock on the door, borrow a little sugar, and head back home. I'd been halfway through making coffee when I realized I was out, and the thought of going to the store felt like too much. She lived just across the hall, always left her door slightly ajar when she was home, and had told me more than once to just knock if you need anything. So I did. When the door opened, I expected a quick exchange, maybe a smile and a thank you before retreating. Instead, I found myself standing in her doorway, thrown off balance. She looked different in the light of the afternoon. Hair pulled back messily, a loose t-shirt tied at the waist, bare feet on polished wooden floors. She smiled the kind of smile that felt warmer than it should, lingering a second too long. "Sugar?" she guessed, already tilting her head with amusement. I nodded. "Busted." "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I've got more than I'll ever use." Her apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and citrus. It was tidy, but not staged. Books stacked on the coffee table, a half-folded blanket draped over the couch, a pair of reading glasses abandoned on the counter. Felt lived in, personal. I followed her to the kitchen, where she reached into a cabinet and pulled down a glass jar. As she poured sugar into a small container for me, she glanced over her shoulder. "While you're here." That phrase caught me. "While you're here." It wasn't the casual tone of someone handing off groceries. It was deliberate, as if she'd been waiting for the right excuse. "Would you mind helping me with something?" she asked. "In the bedroom, a shelf that's been threatening to collapse on me for weeks." For a second, I hesitated. Bedrooms always felt like private spaces, even with neighbors. But the way she said it, calm, natural, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world, left no room for refusal. "Sure," I said, setting the sugar down. She led the way down the short hallway, her steps light, her voice carrying back casually. "Don't laugh when you see it. I keep meaning to fix it myself, but every time I grab the screwdriver, I get distracted." I smiled, though my chest tightened the moment I crossed the threshold. Her bedroom was not what I expected. Soft beige walls, a wide bed neatly made, curtains half-drawn so sunlight fell in golden strips across the carpet. A faint trace of perfume lingered in the air, lavender maybe, or something warmer, something that clung to the senses. The shelf in question leaned slightly above her desk, a row of books threatening to tumble at any moment. "There," she said, pointing. "See? A disaster waiting to happen." I moved closer, inspecting it. She stood right behind me, close enough that I caught the warmth of her presence. When I reached up to adjust the bracket, her hand brushed mine briefly as she passed me a screwdriver. The touch was light, accidental perhaps, but it didn't feel accidental. "Thanks," I muttered, focusing on the screws, though my pulse was doing something entirely different from what my body showed. She leaned on the desk, watching me with that same quiet smile. "You're good at this," she said softly. I shrugged, tightening the final screw. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," she replied. "You just saved me from a pile of broken books and shattered picture frames." When I turned, she was still too close, the kind of close that made stepping back feel unnatural. Her eyes caught mine, and for a second, neither of us looked away. I cleared my throat, trying to break the tension. "There. Should be fine now." She tilted her head, studying me. Then, without moving away, she said, "Funny. You've been living across the hall all this time, and this is the first time you've stepped in here." I forced a small laugh. "Guess I never had a reason before." Her lips curved. "And now you do." The silence stretched. Not awkward, just heavy, filled with something unspoken. I felt it in the way she lingered near the door as I prepared to leave, in the way her fingers grazed the edge of the desk as though grounding herself. When I finally stepped back into the hallway, sugar jar in hand, my coffee forgotten, I knew one thing for certain. Walking into her bedroom had shifted something. And once shifted, it wasn't going to shift back. The next day, I told myself it had been nothing. A simple favor for a neighbor. A shelf fixed, a thank you shared, and that was it. But the memory of standing in her bedroom, the quiet air, the faint trace of her perfume, the way her eyes had lingered, stuck with me longer than I wanted to admit. I found myself listening for her footsteps in the hallway, the click of her door opening or closing. It was ridiculous, I told myself. She was just a neighbor. She probably hadn't thought twice about it. And yet, when the knock came on my door that evening, I felt my pulse pick up before I even answered. She stood there with a small smile, holding a picture frame in her hands. "You're handy," she said matter-of-factly, lifting the frame like evidence. "And I'm hopeless. Could you come by for 5 minutes?" 5 minutes. I agreed before she'd finished the sentence. This time, there was no pretense of sugar or quick errands. She stepped aside to let me in, closing the door gently behind us. "It's the same room," she said, gesturing toward the bedroom. "Apparently I have a curse in there. Everything wants to fall apart." I followed her down the hall, my mind racing ahead of me. The bedroom looked the same as before, but now I noticed more. The softness of the pillows, the faint music playing from a speaker on the dresser, the way the evening light filtered through the curtains. She placed the frame on the bed and handed me a small box of nails. "Sorry," she said lightly. "I should have warned you. You're about to become my personal handyman." I tried to laugh it off. "As long as you don't start charging me rent." She smirked, watching as I crouched near the wall to straighten the frame. Maybe I should. When I glanced back, she was leaning against the doorframe, arms folded, studying me. It wasn't casual. It wasn't the glance of someone distracted or absent. It was steady, deliberate, the kind of look that made my hands slow down, the hammer pausing mid-swing. I cleared my throat, focusing on the wall. There, straight. She stepped closer to inspect it, her shoulder brushing mine as she tilted her head. "Perfect." The word left her lips like it meant something more. I should have stepped back. I should have moved away, created space. Instead, I found myself rooted in place, aware of how near she was, how her hair grazed my arm when she leaned in. For a second, the world shrank to just that, her breath, her presence, the small space between us. She finally pulled back, only to smooth her hand along the freshly fixed frame. "You really are good at this," she said softly. Then, almost too casually, she added, "Close the door on your way out, will you?" But the door was already closed. That detail stuck with me long after I left. I hadn't seen her touch it. Had she done it while I was distracted, or had it been closed from the start? Either way, the message lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. She wanted me in that room with her, and she hadn't let the hallway in. That night, I lay awake staring at my ceiling, every small sound magnified in the dark. I thought of her leaning in, her voice low, the way her shoulder brushed mine. I thought of the door, closed quietly behind us. And I knew this wasn't just about broken shelves or crooked frames anymore. 2 days passed before it happened again. Long enough for me to convince myself I'd imagined the way she'd looked at me. Long enough to tell myself that closed doors and lingering touches didn't mean anything. But not long enough to forget. I'd borrowed a book from her weeks earlier, a mystery novel she'd pressed into my hands in the hallway, and I finally decided to return it. The excuse was flimsy, but it was all I had. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, it was like she'd been waiting. "Finished already?" she asked, her smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I held out the book. It was good. She stepped aside. Come in, then. Tell me what you thought. I followed her into the living room, but she didn't stop there. She turned down the hall, glancing over her shoulder as if making sure I was coming. My feet carried me forward before my mind had caught up. When we reached her bedroom, she set the book down on the nightstand and, without hesitation, closed the door behind us. This time there was no shelf to fix, no frame to hang. The air shifted immediately, heavy and charged. You know, she said, leaning against the dresser. You've been helping me an awful lot lately. I forced a small laugh. Guess I've been drafted as building maintenance. Her eyes narrowed, but her smile didn't fade. That's not what I mean. The silence stretched. My chest tightened as she stepped closer, closing the space between us inch by inch. She stopped just close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, that I could hear the softness of her breath. You've changed, she said quietly. I've noticed it for a while now. I swallowed. Changed how? Her gaze locked on mine, unwavering. The way you look at me. You used to avoid my eyes. Now you don't. You used to rush out of here. Now you linger. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came. She wasn't wrong. Her hand lifted, brushing my arm lightly before settling there. Deliberate this time. The touch wasn't accidental. It was a statement. Do you think I don't see it? She asked, her voice low, steady. The way you hesitate when you're near me. The way you wait for me to say something first. My pulse hammered. I tried to look away, but her hand tightened slightly, pulling my attention back to her. She leaned in, her lips close to my ear, her words sharp and clear. I'll show you what you've been waiting for. The room spun around that single sentence. The door behind us seemed to lock the world out. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. When she pulled back, her eyes held mine, and for the first time, I didn't try to hide the truth. I wanted whatever came next, and she knew it. The silence after her words was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. The kind of silence that fills every corner of a room, pressing down until even breathing feels like a decision. She didn't move right away. Neither did I. But the way she looked at me told me the silence wasn't empty. It was an answer waiting to be spoken without words. Her hand still rested lightly on my arm. She didn't pull it away, not this time. Instead, her fingers traced a slow line down to my wrist, her touch deliberate, unhurried. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened, but I didn't flinch. Couldn't. The door behind us was closed, the curtains drawn, the light dim and golden from the lamp by her bed. Everything outside that room felt distant, irrelevant. The air smelled faintly of her perfume and fresh coffee, a strange mix of ordinary and intoxicating. You've been waiting, she said softly, her eyes locked on mine. I can tell. I tried to answer, but my voice caught. All I managed was a quiet, yes. That was enough. She stepped closer, closing the last of the space between us until her shoulder brushed mine. Her presence was overwhelming, not in its force, but in the calm certainty of it. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't second-guessing. She was choosing, and she wanted me to understand that. Her hand lingered against my chest, just for a moment, before she pulled away slightly, walking toward the bed. She sat on the edge, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, watching me like she was giving me time to decide. Time to cross the distance or walk away. I didn't move at first. My head spun with 100 thoughts, each one louder than the last. But none of them mattered, because what mattered was the way she tilted her head, waiting, as though she already knew what I'd choose. Finally, I stepped forward. Slowly. Each step echoed louder than it should have. When I reached her, I didn't sit right away. I just stood there, looking at her, the weight of everything pressing in. She smiled faintly, her voice low. Good. You're not running this time. I sat beside her. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the warmth of her presence. We didn't rush into anything. The room held us in a careful balance, like the smallest word or gesture could tip it one way or the other. She leaned back on her hands, her gaze steady. You understand, don't you? This doesn't go beyond us. I nodded. I know. The look she gave me then wasn't playful, wasn't teasing. It was something sharper, something that said she trusted me with more than just silence. For a long moment, we just sat there, our shoulders nearly touching, the music from the speaker in the living room barely audible through the closed door. Every detail, her breathing, the way her hair fell loose around her face, the soft curve of her lips, etched itself into my memory with startling clarity. She reached out then, not to pull me closer, but simply to let her fingers brush mine, as if sealing an unspoken agreement. No rush, no performance, just real. The weight in my chest eased, replaced with something else entirely. A certainty that nothing between us would ever be the same again. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't stop me. She just walked me to the door, her steps quiet, her eyes never leaving mine. As I stepped into the hallway, she paused, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe. Her voice was calm, almost a whisper, but the words carried more than enough weight. Now you know, she said. The door closed softly behind me, and I stood there, staring at it, my heart racing. Coffee long forgotten, sleep impossible. I realized something I'd known all along but never admitted until now. She hadn't just shown me what I'd been waiting for. She'd shown me that waiting was over.
Bye bye.